Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this Critical Thought, a detailed discussion on game design, and be sure to subscribe and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright everybody, got a good Critical Thought for you today. In honor of Diablo 3's expansion coming out, I think by the time you're watching this video, and the upcoming DLC or expansion to Path of Exile, we're going to be returning to the topic of loot table design. And this is a really good introductory to game design or to the inner workings that go on behind the scenes when it comes to a game's development. Now, if you missed our previous talk on loot tables, a loot table is essentially an algorithm or a spreadsheet that will define anything and everything that can be created in a loot-based title. And we're not going to be talking about games with preset gear. Stuff like Demon Souls, or games that have RPG systems like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and the like. This has to, what we're focusing on are games where pieces of gear are going to be generated by the game as you're playing. Again, Diablo being probably like the number one example. Now, the loot table, if you imagine a spreadsheet, like the screen here is a spreadsheet. Each column from left to right will basically correspond to a different attribute or a different thing that the game will decide when generating that piece of gear. And what happens is it starts from the most generalized to the most specific. And as a quick test, if you want to take a quick test here, stop the video here and see if you can figure out, if we take a game like Diablo, for instance, go in order from general to most specific in terms of possible gear attributes that you can assign to any piece of equipment in the game. If you want to pause now, go ahead. But I'm going to take a quick sip because it's very hot here, and then we'll move on with the answer. There we go. So if we start with the most general, it would be rarity, because the rarity of the gear will determine any and all stat ranges on various attributes. It'll determine what possible modifiers can be seen, and will also determine again the value of that piece of gear. And in Diablo 3 we have trash, common, magic, rare, legendary, and set, and then this very special ancient variant on top of that. So we move over one column, we come to the gear itself. Is it going to be a sword, a helm, chest piece, pants, the Witch Doctor's mojo, Demon Hunter's quiver, etc. And with the patch 1.04 changes to Diablo 3, Blizzard actually made or put a more of a weight to character or class specific gear. What that means, of course, if you're a wizard, you're most likely to find wizard related gear, not barbarian. Now the next column is where things get very interesting, and that is the modifiers. The modifiers, how we see them, are usually prefixes or suffixes to weapons. The freezing, burning, death sword of quickness plus 5, something like that. And each keyword essentially corresponds to a modifier. So if, let's say, we have electrifying, that could correspond to lightning or shock damage. Quickening plus to attack speed or rate of fire. And the game will basically keep any and all possible modifiers. Now, this is also one of the reasons why modifiers will come after rarity. Because as we see in many ARPG-based titles, specific legendaries will have unique modifiers. And these are usually the special like set-related stuff, or the things that you're going to build your character from. But some of them may use a conditional statement, so some modifiers can't go together. Like, if I have light-based damage, I can't put dark. Or you can't have a freezing, burning axe, which is kind of like a grammatical nightmare as well. While other games just go crazy. You can have the super slow, sonic speed, fiery, freezing axe of exploding quiet. Something like that. And then from the modifier, we would then get to something even more specific, like the ancient variant that we talked about before. But the point is that the loot table itself can create anything from a common dagger that does 1/1 damage to the ultimate god-killing super weapon that you would spend real money to get, and everything in between. Now, when it comes to loot table designs, typically most designers will base them on a level, or have loot tables based on the level of the character. What that means is that the foundation of the table is not going to change from level 1 to whatever, but the possible stat ranges or the variances of the modifiers and gear will. So let's say a level 5 common axe has a damage between 20 to 40. A level 50 common axe could have a damage range of 200 to 400. And narrowing or widening those ranges is a very big deal. One of the things that they learned with Diablo 3 from retail to when they updated the loot tables. The problem is that a very wide range, yes, it makes it more exciting, but it also makes it harder to show progress. Because if I can have a gear that spawns between 500 at the lowest and let's say 5,000 at the highest, then it's going to be very unlikely for me to get something that is really great. I could get stuck with all my weapon stats at around 2,000. But if the range is between 500 and 800 for the specific loot table, then it's a lot easier. I have a greater chance of getting the most possible value out of it. Now, when it comes to growing or progressively building the loot tables, most games will base it on different levels as a form of progress. You could have a loot table at level 1, then one between 6 and 9, 10 through 12, 16 to 20, and so on. And as you're going up these loot tables, the values are going to grow. And in Diablo 3, of course, they tie everything to the player's level, including enemy stats. Now, some games may use more of a general rule, as in the enemies will be at their own level, but your loot table will only be tied to you. But fighting higher than normal enemies could give a weight to higher quality gear. Now, the beauty of loot tables like this is that they are a boon for replayability and progression, because you never know what you're going to find. Again, you can spend 20 minutes and get your first legendary weapon, or you could spend 20 hours. And that's one of the very tricky parts of loot table design. And actually, not just loot table design, but anything built on random or procedurally generated content or level design. Because if you don't know exactly what you're going to get, then you have no means of being able to figure out what the player's stats are or if something is beatable. Like I just said, you could play a game where you go 10, 15 hours, not get one good upgrade. And then your friend plays it, and every fight they get an elite or legendary power up, and they blaze through the game. When I played Card Hunter, for instance, I had nothing but bad luck in terms of getting good gear, and I was unable to progress to the point that I just stopped playing. And the game just became a grind otherwise. But then I had friends who, they're like, Josh, why'd you get stuck there? I got 5 legendary or 5 rare cards and I beat the entire game. And I'm just sitting there going like this. And this is an important part about procedurally and randomly generated design, is that you always need to have a set of instructions or algorithms to define things and have a good idea of what the ranges will be. When I did the Dissecting Design of Spelunky, I talked about how Derek Yu came up with a very robust algorithm for level generation to make sure that the game, no matter what, will always design a level that is solvable by the player. You'll see this in lesser quality games, that if you start here, the exit will be down here, surrounded by rocks. You'll have ladders going up to nowhere, and it's just a confusing mess. And that is really a hallmark of a great procedurally generated designer. Now, the other part about this and why this can help out is by keeping to the loot tables, it makes it easier for you to have an guesstimate of what the player's stat or power ranges will be at any given point. Let's say a area has enemies between level 15 and 20, and there are two loot tables, one at 15 and one at 20. If we were to use like a gear rating system, and a gear rating would basically be a numerical value of all the gear the player can wear at that given time. Let's say the level 15 loot table has a lowest possible value of gear rating 500. And then the level 20 loot table, the gear can go up as high as a gear rating of 1000. So what that tells me as a designer is I cannot design enemies less than 500 gear rating, and I can't design them higher than 1000, because then you run into an issue of balance. If the enemies aren't providing a suitable challenge, the game becomes boring. But if the player is constantly trying to, punch above their weight, they're going to get frustrated and give up. And again, it takes a deft hand when it comes to designing a loot table for this to work out. Now, with that said, though, there are other considerations you should be thinking about when designing a loot table. When it comes to your modifiers, you have to be really careful in terms of giving the player a good idea of how things work. Because I've played many ARPGs that just hit the player over the head with modifiers, to the point that we could design a little game in 30 seconds, name as many possible gear modifiers that you can. But in Grim Dawn, for instance, they went crazy. You had, and get ready for this one, so you have fire damage, burning damage, freezing damage, ice damage, shock damage, lightning damage, poison damage, curse damage, slow down damage, and again, we just keep going down the line. And this can become confusing, because when you're hitting the player in the head with so many variances of gear, it can become overwhelming. Do I take the freezing burning hammer or the burning freezing hammer? And one of the things you can do in this case is to provide subtle ways of telling the player what to focus on. And typically we see this in ARPGs that allow for passive benefits. Let's say you have specific skills that give a bonus towards fire damage, or a skill that is based on the player's fire damage. Well, if I'm going to use this, then I'm going to focus on gear or modifiers that give fire damage. And that's exactly what I did in Grim Dawn with some of my higher up characters. Once I settled on the primary damage type, I went all in. Plus percentage, just plus flat damage, my additional passive bonuses, skills, you name it. And all that just works to synergize. Now, one other danger to keep in mind when it comes to so much loot, and again, going back to the random nature of it, is the fact that it's usually good to give the player a secondary means of getting gear, if they don't get lucky in the first place. With Diablo 3, for instance, if you've played the game, you know that with the Reaper of Souls expansion, there is a massive jump in gear quality from level 60 to level 61. And the reason, of course, is because 61 up is the Reaper of Souls expansion content. So they want to make a big enough boost to show that difference. So what they typically did in Diablo 3 is that once you get to level 61, you should immediately buy level 61 gear, even if it is of a lower rarity, because the stat difference is just that big. And this is why, when you're dealing with loot table design, you should always have a second or third way of getting gear. In Diablo 3, you have the shops, you have the gambling system. Some games let you maybe re-roll gear or craft gear. The point is, if, for instance, I cannot find quality boots that are my level or even close to it, and I have gear everywhere else, let me craft or buy a set. It's not going to be as powerful as what I could find, but it will still keep me competitive towards everything at my level. And that's very important, again, if you're matching enemy stats to the player level. Because if the player can't get the gear to keep up, they're going to be in deep trouble. But with that said, we're going to wrap up talking about loot tables for today. To end this video on, for those of you watching this who have designed games with either ARPG elements or procedurally or randomly generated content, how did you devise the loot tables or to generate the gear you wanted? And for you consumers watching, have you played games other than the ones that we've mentioned that had really great loot table or really great item design, and why? Or if you played some that just didn't work for you, and why? Because again, when this works, it will just carry a game. We've talked about this before with the loot cycle. You kill enemies to get more loot, so you become stronger, so you can kill more enemies, and again, we go around and around and around, then 80 hours later, you decide to stop playing the game. But when it doesn't work, it can just demolish your interest in playing the game. This is very true when designers like to go up in difficulty. And what they do is they just massively boost the enemies to the point that you start playing and they are going to dominate you until you grinded or got lucky enough to get gear to match. Speaking of that, another really good example of loot table design, if you want to study this, is Borderlands, which feature different weapons and different manufacturers, and then have different modifiers and variances as well. And that's a really good example, again, of just how much a loot table and a gear that is being procedurally generated can add to a title. But with that said, we're going to wrap things up for today. Thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. If you enjoyed the piece, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And check back for more discussions on game design here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And come back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on game development, be sure to check out game-wisdom.com. Follow me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day. And to help support everything that I do, you can find me on Patreon under GWBycer or Game Wisdom. Your donations can help to keep things running, and when we hit some goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy. So, thanks again for watching, and be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design on the Game Wisdom channel.